Morning everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how cyber recovery can help protect your data. We're going to cover the increased cyber risk and the impact of ransomware. Then we're going to get into a demo and a look at our cyber recovery solution, and then we'll wrap up and we'll take Q&A at the end. So just to introduce your speakers today, I'm Dean Lewis. I'm our Head of Technical Strategy and Direction, responsible for our technical strategy across all of our technology areas at CAE.
Hi everyone, I'm Imran Arshad. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect, so I work specifically in the data center team.
Cool. So increased cybersecurity risk. I think that everyone on the webinar will have noticed a change in recent times in the approach of cyber attackers. We see in early attacks that they would look to encrypt primary data, but increasingly saw organisations were able to recover using their backups to mitigate against paying a ransom fee, and they develop more sophisticated tools and skills. And increasingly, we're seeing them looking to sabotage backups, sabotage infrastructure. We've seen them look to encrypt not just that frontline data, those frontline applications, but actually the underlying virtual servers. And increasingly, we're seeing those sophisticated attacks looking to attack the underlying infrastructure, which creates more of a challenge. And you see that bear out in the fact on the other side of our slide here, where just 69% of IT decision makers globally, they're lacking confidence in their ability to recover all of their business critical data in the event of a cyber attack. And that's really not surprising when we look at those points there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think with a lot of organisations, they put a lot of stress and I guess cost into the prevention side of things. And I think there's less emphasis on the recovery side of things, so it's almost like let's just stop everyone kind of getting in. But I think you have to have the mentality that no matter what you put in place, there's always going to be a chance that somebody is going to get in and manage to attack the infrastructure. So how do you then recover from that?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, in December 2014, we saw what you could consider as a real watershed moment in cyber attacks. If anyone remembers the film, The Interview, I've not seen it myself, but I believe that it riled the North Koreans, and it resulted in Sony being attacked. You can see there that they erased data on nearly half of the company's PCs. Now, the big difference in this attack compared to others was the attack was specifically undertaken to destroy and erase data, as opposed to stealing information, taking that information that would maybe then be resold. The attack was specifically targeted to destroy an organisation's data. So that is a real change in approach we've seen from organisations in the reasons or the underlying drivers behind a cyber attack.
Yeah, I think kind of before that, it was more around kind of data theft, really.
Yeah,
it's more, I guess, the kind of solutions you had around them was more around kind of data loss prevention rather than recovering from a cyber attack.
Yeah, and we've seen instances closer to home, right, in the UK. So many on the webinar will remember WannaCry. I think WannaCry, the interesting thing there was it wasn't one that we just read about in the newspapers on the front pages, but many people for the first time felt the impact of a ransomware attack can have on organisations, in that it really affected healthcare trusts. They had to shut down IT systems, which meant they couldn't operate, hitting quite a broad spectrum of the population. But equally, we've seen other attacks more targeted on other organisations like an English university, Northumbria, where encryption of their servers meant that they had to cancel exams, they couldn't onboard students, and they had to revert to paper-based processes just to be able to operate as an organisation.
So I would I think the interesting thing with that is that these are organizations that you would think, why would someone want to attack them? Is the NHS, universities, and I think it just kind of goes, I mean, they're not Sony, I guess North Korea had a legitimate reason, or not a legitimate one, but a reason to attack them. But with places like the NHS, you would think, why would anybody want to attack them? And it just goes to show that potentially anybody could be, or any organisation could be a target.
Yeah, and I think that's key, that it is any organisation that faces the risk. And we see that bear out here, right? So how many UK-based medium-sized businesses have identified breaches attacks in 2021? And this is government figures. Now, I'm not asking you to submit an answer, but just take an answer for yourself. It's 65%. It's a third of organisations last year that identified that. That's a huge amount. That's a huge amount in the UK alone that have identified a breach or an attack of some kind that they've witnessed. And we see that 2/3 number bear out further here when we look at ransomware. 66% of all organisations have been hit by ransomware. And 65% of attacks are successfully encrypting data. I think the key factor on here, though, is that final one, where only 65% of data is restored after paying a ransom. There's an implicit view that actually, if you pay the ransom, you get your data back, but that's not always the case. And there are 35% of the data that's restored there that's still not usable. That's not restored correctly. And that's a huge challenge, because after you've had your data tampered with by an organisation, by a threat actor, do you trust the integrity of that data going forward? How do you know that they've not left further viruses or future attacks, left you open to future attacks?
Yeah, and I think that really is the key point, that you can't assume that you're going to be able to get your data back, because ultimately a lot of the time you're dealing with criminal organisations. So
Yeah.
really, do you want to really trust that they're gonna be true to their word? And a lot of the times as well, those kind of 35% of times where the people have not been able to restore their data, sometimes it might just have been a simple case of the encryption key didn't work, or whatever. Yeah. There's something gone wrong with the recovery process, and the cost of then recover. I mean, how do you quantify the cost of losing all that data? Because every organisation's data is, they're kind of the most critical thing that they have.
100%. And you mentioned crime, but there is a diverse set of threat actors out there that are operating and adding to that risk. We can see there on the right-hand side that you've got global organisations, governmental organisations that are undertaking some kind of cyber attack as part of warfare or as terrorism campaigns. But equally, you mentioned crime, and actually crime is there's been a real change in dynamic there, because I think it's moved away from that traditional view of the hooded geek in a dark room trying to break into someone's network, to these being highly professionalized, very skilled, mature crime organizations that are operating at scale. And we've seen that with Colonial Pipeline, where that attack was undertaken by a professional organization who released press releases. They were providing ransomware as a service package that could be bought online on the dark web. And increasingly, this is big business, and it's not a surprise, because we don't see many people caught. The risks of imprisonment or being punished are quite low, but the financial gains can be really high.
I'm sure I've seen a stat somewhere suggesting that from a kind of a criminal point of view, as far as organised crime goes, it's the biggest sector in organised crime now. It's worth billions.
Not a surprise. And just lastly, before I hand over to Imran, so Mitre are it's a knowledge base, and they have a whole heap of adversary tactics on how to deal with a cyber attack and providing strategies We've seen with Mitre's own impact analysis here that their framework suggests that actually we see a lot around immutable backups as a solution to prevent ransomware. And those top two examples where we're dealing with a ransomware attack or a backup deletion, immutability is absolutely fine to solve that problem, right? That will allow you to recover. However, once we get beyond that and we get into what we said before, where we're seeing underlying infrastructure, virtual machines, platforms, backup infrastructure being attacked, actually at that point, having an immutable backup, which although will be available, if you have no underlying infrastructure to recover that to, you have no backup infrastructure to be able to recover that, that becomes a challenge, and you're in a situation where what is your recovery time? What is the recovery time that you can deliver if, yes, you've got immutable backups, but you have no backup environment, you have no front-end virtual environment to recover those VMs, those applications, that data to, and then you're in a situation where it can be quite a long time to recover and bring your organisation back online.
I think the key thing to remember there is even with if your backups have been stored in an immutable fashion, it doesn't mean, for example, with a platform wipe type attack, that somebody doesn't get the right level of credentials and have the right level of knowledge to be able to just attack that as a platform and just completely trash it and take it down. And at that point, you potentially lost your immutable backups.
Okay. Cool. Right, so I'm going to hand over at this point to Imran, who's going to talk you through our cyber recovery solution, and then we'll get to a demo as well.
As far as solutions go for cyber recovery, our solution is based on the Dell Cyber Recovery solution, and we kind of follow their best practices. What we've done though is kind of breaking it down into different levels. Because not every customer can afford the full-on approach, but obviously you need to understand what the risks are with going to a specific level and what's involved in that and how much protection you get. So we would recommend having, breaking it down into good, better, and best. For a good solutions, this really should be considered as your baseline level of solution. It should be the minimum we think that every organisation should be looking at implementing. So the first step is to have some kind of immutability in there. So that could be something as simple as having just a Linux server that has been made, has immutable storage on it. That'll work fine. I think that's a common approach that's being taken out there at the moment. We would recommend maybe taking it a step further to going to something like a data domain. That would be our preferred solution, because then you get a solution that is SEC 17A compliant as well. So SEC 17A is a regulation from in the US for financial institutes, which basically has a certain mandated level of immutability that should be in there. So it kind of prevents that immutable storage, for example, from being attacked by the clock on it being spoofed or any other. It makes it very difficult for somebody, or nearly impossible for someone, to break that immutability. And doing it through something like a data domain or a dedicated backup appliance, we feel works better than just doing it with a Linux server, potentially, which you would also have to spend more time configuring, and make sure it's not on the management network, and certain things you can try and do, but it's never going to be as good as a dedicated appliance. The other thing as well we kind of recommend is having your security credentials kind of tiered, so that your backup environment isn't only just there for backup admins to get access to. In fact, ideally what you want to have is at least two different copies of your backup data. So you want to be able to have your primary backup data that obviously your admins have access to. Ideally, you want to have an immutable copy of that data, and with that immutable copy of data, we would recommend having that separated so that only security personnel have the credentials to access that data. And then that gives just another layer of separation and that extra security level in there to give you that protection. And the other thing, and this kind of also comes back to the appliance point that I was making, where that's kind of part of hardening that backup environment. So ideally as well, we want to use more secure backup transport protocols. So we don't want to use common protocols such as CIFS and NFS that are really, really well known. There's a lot of customers out there, for example, that would be using a Windows server with just a CIFS share on it, for example, to store their backups on. And that is going to be quite an easy target for somebody to attack. So ideally, we want to be using some kind of proprietary protocol that is much more secure, much more difficult for someone to crack. And ideally, we want that kind of data encrypted as well as it's being backed up. So, for example, with Data Domain, you can use Data Domain Boost, which is their proprietary protocol, and that integrates with the backup application. And transports it in a specific way, so it's not going to be that well known and not that easy for someone to intercept that data and do something to it as well. And then it avoids having having a Windows server, for example, with your backups on, that might be an easy target. Now, if we move on to something that's a better solution for that, so on the last slide that Dean showed, we did see that even though immutability gives you a certain level of protection, there's a lot of attack vectors out there that potentially will get around that immutability. As long as that backup is on the network, it's going to be potentially be a target. So this is where isolation comes in. So we think that's a really important step in there. So ideally, we want some kind of automated air gap built into the system where it can automatically bring the kind of backup storage online and allow you to take the copy of the latest backup onto that and then take it back off the network. And as soon as it's off the network, there should be no way of somebody being able to connect to that and get access to that data, literally to the point where somebody would have to manually go down to the data center and connect into it. And if that's your biggest challenge, then there's obviously other issues going on. If somebody can get access to the actual data center, but that's the level that we think is the best way to do it. And that also provides better protection from insiders as well, because it's not easy for any kind of IT admin or someone to actually just access that backup and do anything to it as well, because again, they would have to physically go down to the data center and get access to it as well. The other nice thing with the solution is that the architecture does support multiple kind of backup vendors. It's very much kind of backup vendor agnostic. There is a certain degree of integration, and we'll see that in the demo as well, where there are advantages to having integrated backup software with that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It'll still work fine and work without, provide that automated air gap with pretty much kind of any backup software. The only thing we need is just basically two data domains effectively would be required to be able to build that kind of solution. Now, for the best solution, we recommend having some kind of analytics in there, so something that adds the intelligence in there. So how do you know, for example, if you've had an ongoing attack for a while that you've not identified, how do you know that when you come to then recover from that? So you may have an automated air gap, you may have immutable backups, but there may have been something that's backed up that is already kind of encrypted at that point and been moved and back into your backup infrastructure and then copied into your kind of vault environment that's been air gapped off. Now, when you come to do the recovery, how do you know that that's not the case, that's not being compromised? So you need some kind of intelligence in there that can identify if any of your backups have been compromised. I think by doing that as well, by having, this builds on the other two steps as well in there. So you couldn't have just that on its own. You have to have your immutability, you have to have your air gap in there as part of the solution. And by having all those combined, we also have a safe harbor certified solution. So this is the only accredited solution that is available on the market today that does all those things to a certain standard. The Safe Harbor, that's an institute in the US which advises financial organizations as to kind of what steps they should take to provide them with cybersecurity and cyber resiliency as well. So this solution is fully compliant with that. Okay, so with that said, we'll switch over to the demo. I'm just going to do a quick demo just to give a clearer picture of what we mean by good, better, and best, and immutability and isolation and analytics, and show each of these pieces working in the cyber recovery software.
So just before we jump to that, I want to check and drop something in the comment box Q&A if you need, just to make sure that everyone can see. Despite many run-throughs, we inevitably got those obligatory technical issues. So I just want to make sure everyone can see the slides. If you can't, let us know while Imran is setting up for the demo. I'm just going to leave you with this piece of guidance here, and I hope you can read that on the screen, where make backups as often as possible, copy them to a separate medium, store it separately. It's advisable to store the media with backups in another room. Backup media must be encrypted. This is internal guidance from the Conti hacking network. So this is an organisation that's focused on hacking, who in their own guidance give clear and defined rules on how you should back up and protect those backups to enable to recover. So just an interesting snippet of information that we're quite fond of. Over to you, Imran.
This is the PowerProtect Cyber Recovery dashboard. So this PowerProtect Cyber Recovery is the heart of the Dell solution. When we log in, we can see that we've got our alerts here, so it tells us straight away if there's anything wrong. Also, we can see the status of the vault, so we can see right now if that's locked, and that will stay locked. The only way for that to get unlocked and open is when you open up the vault to get the latest backup. So if we go to policies, see we've got a couple of backup applications in there already. We've got Networker and PowerProtect Data Manager, which are the Dell backup solutions. Going to copies now, the first thing I want you to do is show what we mean by immutability. So we've got a couple of backups in here. So if I click on here, we can see from this side it's not locked at the moment, so it's not immutable. And I can just go in there and delete that. And then if we go back to that screen, should show that it's deleted. Yes. So it's deleted and gone. There's no way for me to get that backup back. Now with this one, if I now click on lock and just do the default policy, now if we go back into it, you can see that lock signs come up now. So now if I click on that, I can't delete it. And there's no way that I could delete that. So I couldn't go into the data domain where that backup is sitting. No way I could go into that and delete that without trashing that data domain completely. The backup application, it cannot delete it either. So there's no way to delete that. But so that's what we mean by immutability. That backup now can't be deleted or tampered with. So if we go back to policies, we can do a number of actions with this. So these are the base actions at the bottom: be able to make a copy, a snapshot copy, synchronize the latest backup, apply immutability, or synchronize and make a copy of that backup. Now, the main two that we would normally recommend using are the secure copy, which opens up the vault, takes the latest copy in, and then secure copy analyze, which then does the same thing, gets the latest backup in there, and then also starts the analysis process. So if we kick that off, and we can have a look at what happens. We can actually schedule this as well. So if we go to schedules, we can actually automate this process. So we can select the policy that we want to put against, and we can select these actions. So then on a schedule basis, we can select that, and it'll automatically then every once a day, for example, open up the vault and pull in the latest backup copy. So if we go to dashboard, we can see that the vault is unlocked now, and it's starting that process of pulling in the latest backup. Now, if there was an ongoing cyber attack, the only way the vault would actually normally close is as soon as that window that you have, because you set a window of how long you want the vault to be opened, As soon as that shuts, then the backup, that process finishes and the vault is secure. But if you have an ongoing attack, or suddenly detect you have an ongoing attack, you can secure the vault. So you click on secure the vault, that will straight away just lock that down, and nothing's coming in and out of that vault now. And then when you know it's safe, you can release the vault, and then it'll go back to its normal schedule at that point and carry on. Now let me just switch to this one that I prepared earlier. So now we're just gonna just go into how we do the kind of recovery process and how we do the analytics side of things. So in this one, that copy has finished. That latest backup is finished doing the analysis, and straight away we can see it's found a suspicious copy. So if we go back to policy and see copies, we can see that copy there as well. The administrator will get alerted. So for example, you can also set it up to send an email alert out as well with some details in there of what's happened. We can also log into CyberSense, which is actually our analytics engine, which is from Index Engines. And we can actually query that and find out what data has actually been compromised here. So we can basically do a search, for example, for any suspect data, and then we can even do a search for any previous versions of that we have available that we can kind of recover from. So we had multiple backup copies there. We had 2 copies. We had one bad, one good. So you can see here that the data here, we can see that it's all kind of encrypted and changed. And if we go further down, we can see the PDF versions there as well. And we can potentially kind of select these and select an action, so we can actually download a CSV, for example, of that, and then you have a list of all the files that have been compromised and the files that you then need to recover as well. So it's quite an easy way of identifying what you need to recover. And then when you come to do your recovery, it's quite a simple process. So this is really where having kind of the backup application integration also kind of helps. So we've got our copies of data there, so we can see that's a suspicious one, so we don't want to recover that. So we'll click on the one we want to recover, click on application, select a backup application. So we want to have our backup application ideally in the vault as well. And what it'll do, it'll make sure that it recovers a good copy of that backup application as well, just in case that's been compromised in any way. So we click on apply, and then it kicks off that process of recovering a good copy of that backup application first. And what it'll do is it'll put it into an isolated sandbox. So it keeps that from a network perspective, still keeping that completely isolated. And then when it's booted up that backup application, then you can basically click on launch app. It won't be available yet, but you click on launch app, log into your backup application, get it back up and running, and then you just go through your normal recovery process. Okay, so that's the end of the demo.
So over to you again, Imran, just to talk through the solution itself.
Yeah, so before I jump into that, I just wanted to quickly go over what happens during a cyber attack. So just to kind of build up that scenario in a typical kind of environment, you will normally have production and a DR, and usually data is being automatically replicated to the DR. Some institutes might have an active scenario where you've got both sides of production in effect. If you have like a stretch cluster for environment, for example, so everything synchronously replicated. Some organizations may even have a third site that they're replicating out to, which would be on a longer schedule, so maybe once every day it replicates out to the third site. Then you have your backup infrastructure with your backup tool or application. Most customers will always have a primary storage that they back up to. And then also, we always recommend having a secondary backup copy as well of that. And most customers will be doing that. So on a schedule basis, again, overnight, it will be, as soon as that primary is backup completed, most solutions will be able to then copy that data to a secondary copy as well, whether that's offsite or wherever else that is, could be in cloud, wherever that is. Now, in an attack, one of the things that is very common now is one of the first things cyber criminal or somebody making an attack will want to do is target your backup infrastructure, because they know if they don't do that, then you're just going to quickly be able to recover. Most backup applications are really good at recovering these days. Most of them support things like instant restore, so you can quickly get VMs up and running again. So they need to take out that backup application. So for example, Veeam's a very common one, just because it's been so successful, really good solution. But because it's so common, it's one of the common ones that a lot of attacks will target. So they'll take out that backup, look to take out that backup application. They'll compromise your backup, so your backups that are on there.
Just to check, it's worth noting as well that most deployments of Veeam will be deployed on a Windows server.
Windows, yeah, and using a Windows repository
exactly
as well. So that makes it even easier for someone to access it, encrypt that data, and compromise it. So once somebody's compromised the primary backup, that encrypted data is going to automatically go to the secondary backup, and on the secondary one, because it's on the network anyway, they'll be able to access that and encrypt all that data as well. Once they've done that, they can attack the production, which automatically flows into DR and your third site. They're all on the network anyway, so there's no reason why they couldn't simultaneously just attack all three of those. And then at that point, you've got no way of recovering from that. And the average cost of not just the ransom, but also being able to kind of recover your infrastructure and the lost amount of kind of downtime you have from it, the average cost of that is like $30 million, which it's a big cost to swallow. So yeah, it doesn't matter how much insurance you might have, is not going to pay for a loss of data, the amount of downtime that you're going to have, and whether it'll even cover the cost of all of that. Some vendors out there have like guarantees and stuff, but they're not going to pay out that much money if you have been compromised and are not able to recover that data. So it's critical to have some kind of steps in place to make sure you're able to recover. So with a good solution, we want to start off by, at the very least, hardening this backup environment. So we want to try and get rid of Windows elements. So for example, if you're using a Windows repository, at the very, very least, move to a Linux repository, which you can put immutable backups into. We would obviously recommend having something like a data domain or a dedicated backup appliance, which is already kind of hardened and gives you a much stronger level of immutability that is Sec 17A kind of compliant. And once it's in there as well, obviously we can make that copy immutable as well. Just from a practical point of view, you may not always want to have both of your copies of data made immutable. Just from the point of view of just a common problem that I've always kind of come across with customers is with their primary backup storage, or with just backup storage in general, sometimes you start running out of space. So the only way to get around that is either buy more storage, which sometimes there's no budget for, or you just start deleting some of your older backups. So if you do want a little bit of flexibility on that, then maybe you don't leave your primary backup immutable. Maybe you just leave that as a normal copy and have your secondary at the very least as an immutable copy, and that gives you that flexibility. But in an ideal scenario, you would have both of them encrypted, and that way no backups can get encrypted or tampered with, and none of that can get copied across to the secondary backup. So now in this scenario, if your backup application gets attacked and your primary backup is encrypted, you'll still be able to recover your backup application, because you'll have a good copy of your backup application on your secondary storage, and then you'll be able to recover your data from that. So what happens in a scenario where, because that secondary copy is still on the network, and that means that somebody still potentially could get access to it. So especially if you've not got that set up so that it's only security team have access to it, if you've got it set up so it's still the backup admin. So obviously the backup admin at this point has had their credentials compromised. There's no reason why they wouldn't go through. And even if it's been made immutable, if they've got some kind of, or have the skill level to be able to do it, they could potentially perform some kind of wiping attack and just completely trash that platform that it's sitting on. So at that point, you've still lost all of your backup. So this is where having a better solution with some kind of air gap in there makes a lot of sense and gives that extra level of protection. So here we would create a cyber recovery vault. Now in that vault, we have some vault storage. Now that vault storage doesn't have to be the exact same size as your full copy of the backup. The idea is to protect your critical data. So it's typically 10 to 25% the size of your normal backup environment. And you would normally have things like, for example, your critical applications like CRM application, if you're healthcare, maybe your EPR application, a backup of that in there. Also, critical infrastructure components as well. So maybe have backups of your switch configurations and stuff like that, Active Directory, anything that you need for your infrastructure to get it back up and running, have a backup copy of that in the vault. And the location of that isn't really all that important, I guess, because it's not, the idea of it is it doesn't have to be off-site, because that's not your goal. That's what your DR is really for, and it's not a DR system. A DR, as we see kind of on the left-hand side, DR is not a cyber recovery solution, because that can get compromised quite easily in an attack. And even with a backup, that isn't a cyber resilient solution, because that can still get potentially compromised. This is, so the idea of it doesn't really matter too much on the location of it. Ideally, in fact, the way we want to have it set up is that it's on the same location as your backup infrastructure, because then you can literally connect it in directly into a data domain. So if you have a data domain there, you put a data domain in the vault, and then literally it's just the replication ports that are directly connected to each other. So there's no other network connections coming in and out, and that makes it incredibly secure. And then we have the Cyber Recovery Vault software in there as well, and that then effectively controls and opens closes those replication ports. Now, if you want a bit more flexibility, what you can do is put in a firewall as well, or if you wanted to put it at a different location where your backup appliances aren't already there, so you can't directly connect it in, you can put in a dedicated firewall in there. But on that firewall, we would only have literally the ports open that allow the replication traffic from the replication ports on the data domain. Everything else is completely shut off, so there's still no access in or out of that vault. Now, during our, as we talked about in the demo, during the schedule where we open up that vault, so it's normally closed, and that gives us our air gap. When the right time comes, it will then open up the vault. The data domain will pull in the latest backup copy. Once it's finished pulling that in, it'll then the cyber recovery software will automatically just shut that off, so the vault is closed and secure at that point. And then our copies in there are, we can set up the schedule, the actions there to also make them automatically immutable as well. So now in this scenario, then now even if we didn't have any mutability in our backup environment, even if those backups got compromised or trashed, even if we had a mutability and they got trashed somehow and the whole environment is taken out, we can still recover potentially from our cyber recovery vault. We can recover our backups in there because they've not been attacked, and it's very difficult for somebody to attack those unless they literally went physically down to the vault and logged into it, which again, that's a different issue altogether around security. Now, other things we would potentially put into the vault or recommend having in are things such as an Active Directory, because your applications that you want to recover, quite a lot of the time they're going to need some kind of Active Directory integration and authentication through their DNS in there. NTP server is something that's quite important as well. So an independent NTP server should be part of that, particularly for the data domain. It needs to have that time access. So you have a completely independent NTP server in there with its own GPS access. Backup server as well. Good to have a server just for the backup application, so you can use that to do your recoveries. And if you want to take it a step even further, you may even want a small recovery environment in there. So maybe a small ESX cluster, so you have enough resource in there to actually recover your applications into as well. But that bit's down to kind of customer preference and obviously the budget as well. Now, with this, I guess one of the challenges of this is that what would happen if one of the backups that actually went into the vault were encrypted or compromised in some way? You would have no way of actually knowing that if any of the data, for example, in that backup was encrypted, you wouldn't know. So that's where we want to add the intelligence in, and this is where the best solution comes into it. So for that, we would to kind of analyze that VM or those backups, we would add in CyberSense. And as we saw in the demo, that can be set up to automatically analyze those backups. So it'll tell us if that backup is compromised, and it'll tell us which backups are good as well. So we can easily find a recoverable backup. It'll tell us what files have been encrypted or compromised, so we know which data then we need to actually recover as well from that. Okay, so in summary, I think the important kind of takeaways are that to remember that backup is not disaster recovery, and DR is certainly not a cyber recovery solution. So they are all designed. So backup and disaster recovery, they are designed to do specific things. They're designed to get you back up and running as quick as possible. And to do that, they have to be on the network. Otherwise, it's quite difficult to keep them updated. And you potentially can have quite a lot of data loss. So you want the minimum amount of data loss and backup as quick as possible, recover as quick as possible. Whereas with a cyber recovery solution, our goal is to make it as difficult as possible for somebody to get to that data. So inherently, that means it will have a longer recovery time, but you will still be able to recover your data. Then also beyond that, having the immutability, having the air gap, being able to have a way of identifying if your data is in a good state. It's not easy to do. It's like manually, if you want to do that, that would be very difficult to do because you would have to manually recover your backups and test them, which is not going to be easy to do, especially if you want a vaulted environment as well. And the only access into that is by physically going down to the data center. That's very difficult to do. So we ideally do want some kind of intelligence in there to be able to automate that process. I think as well, with the way things are going, there's a lot of organizations out there that are being targeted, and pretty much anyone could be a target, and that's been proven. If NHS organizations and universities, at the end of the day, a lot of this, it just comes down to money. It's nothing personal a lot of the times. When it's a crime involved, it's just about making money. So it doesn't really matter who the organization is. You could be a target as well. And with our solution, there's simple steps that you can take. We can build the solution out to start off with a good solution, potentially at a lower cost, and then we've got that base layer in at least, and then we can always kind of build on that potentially in the solution in quite a simple way. And you've always got to remember it's your own kind of trust and reputation that is at risk here.
Yep. Thanks, Imran. So just very quick, I'm conscious of time now, but quick summary of our overall approach to cybersecurity. We take a platform approach, which is to elevate above just the products, just the individual components, and provide organizations with a consolidated set of tools, solutions, technology that gets them closer to the outcome as quick as possible. Because as we've seen with what we talked about today, the outcome is about protecting the organization, and you need to do that in the most effective way. Now, we focus very much today on the recovery side, but actually we're providing that platform approach across the entire spectrum of cybersecurity protection, so prevention, detection, response, and recovery. And the way you're going to do that effectively is by having an integrated set of tools that are going to get you there and enable you to understand what your environment looks like, understand what the threat vectors are, and being able to respond to those. And in that event where you do have a situation that actually you move to recovery, giving you the tools to be able to do that effectively. One final thing from us. we provide a free cyber resiliency assessment. So if you want to understand where you are, you want a health check on exactly where you are, and some support on how to build a roadmap to where you want to get to, please reach out to your CAE account team. You can reach out to myself or Imran, and we can arrange that for you. You can read a little bit more about what we do on our website. You can undertake the workshop as aforementioned, or you can reach out at hellothisiscae.com. And at this point, I think we're gonna stop talking and we're going to open up the floor to any questions from you.
Okay, cool. So I think we have a couple of questions that have come in. So yeah, the presentation will be shared with everybody and a recording of it at the end. Question of, do we have a breakdown of the 65% of I guess of the attacks that have happened and stuff? I think it all comes from there's a Sophos report, I think.
We've got the links to the sources, so we can provide the sources. They are in the slide deck, but I'll make sure there's a slide at the end with those sources that you can read the reports.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think that also there was a couple of questions as well around the Vault environment as well. So there's a question on how do we update the Vault environment? So yeah, it's a good question, because obviously it's not on the network. So how do you actually update that? So I guess there's two ways you can approach it. One way you could do it is the only network access in and out is through the data domain. So you could potentially put if you have like a number of servers and you have storage and software and stuff in that Vault, you can put all the updates into your production data domain, for example, and then that'll get replicated into the Vault, and then you can basically manually go down, physically log into the Vault there and manually do the updates. It's not particularly pretty, but the idea is to make it as difficult as possible for somebody to do anything nefarious to compromise that Vault. So yeah, we don't really want that to make it easy to update, even though that is a security thing as well. You want to make sure it's secure as possible, but that is a manual thing that you would do. I guess the other way you could do it is, I guess, take a copy of the updates and kind of manually log in and do it that way as well. So you can do it. There's a couple of different ways you can approach that.
I think it's important, with the context of the purpose of that Vault. It's getting a balance between making it easy to do a task like that. Is secondary to its primary purpose, which is to give you that last line of defense in an event where you're dealing with a cyber attack. And that's the primary purposes of making sure that it is as hardened and offline as possible.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. There's another question on, is there a way to monitor the Vault? Because obviously it's not on the network. So for this, as part of the Dell solution, they do provide things called data diodes. So they are very specific appliances that allow one-way access into or out of the Vault. So we wouldn't really recommend having one to do anything coming into the Vault, because it just gives another doorway to get in there. So, but one thing you can do is have a data diode that has some outbound access, but just for monitoring data. So, for example, sending an email or an alert out of the system. So certainly you can add that in, and that'll give you that ability to monitor it remotely without having to constantly go down and physically log in. And in fact, that's probably something we would want to put in as a standard, just because it just makes it quite difficult to manage it if you've not got that kind of remote monitoring capability as well. So that's certainly something we would normally do as well. Okay, so there's a question on, does the solution work with Veeam? So actually, there was one thing I forgot to point out on the presentation, was that with the actual Cyber Vault itself does have a degree of integration with applications, but it doesn't have to have. So this is the air gap part of it, the Cyber Recovery Vault software, that doesn't necessarily need to have any application integration. It can do so. It's integrated with all the Dell software, Commvault and Veritas backup software, but it doesn't necessarily have to. It'll work happily with any backup software because all it's doing in effect is just opening and closing the vault. It doesn't really care what the backup application is. It's nice to have that integration because then you can see what's going on with that backup application on there, and it can integrate into the recovery workflow that it has, but you don't necessarily need to have that. Now with the CyberSense bit, that is a bit different because that is does require that integration just because every backup application writes its data in its own proprietary format, and that's just a fact of life, unfortunately, just the way that backup applications work. So it does need to be able to understand what that format, be able to read it and understand the data within that. So that's why the CyberSense bit does have to be integrated with a backup application. So it works with and is integrated with the Dell family of software, so Avamar, Networker, PowerProtect Data Manager, works with Commvault, and also works with Veritas, so Net Backup and Backup Exec. Unfortunately, it does not work with Veeam at the moment. It's not integrated with Veeam, so it doesn't understand, for example, a .vbk file. It's not going to be able to open that up and scan that and understand what's going on in that, so it doesn't support that format. Now with something like Veeam, because Veeam is quite common, so the way that we would potentially approach Veeam is, in fact, if we go back a couple of slides, if we go back to the Vault bit here, we get the pointer on there. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so with the Vault, what we would potentially do here is we would have a Veeam backup server in the Vault itself, and then instead of CyberSense, you would essentially use some kind of antivirus or anti-malware type solution in there. And what Veeam can do is that it's got its own Sure backup process where it can automate the kind of testing of backup. So you would first of all set up Sure Backup with a Veeam server in the Vault, and then that can basically read the backups off the data domain in the Vault, and then run those backups and test that it's working. As part of that Sure Backup process, it basically, once it's done the test that it can boot up the VM, it also has a tick box in there to allow you to do an AV scan, for example, of that VM that's been backed up. So that's how we would probably build it up in a Veeam environment. Basically, use Veeam's tools to do that. So where Veeam, for example, has some I guess weaknesses in their solution is that there's no real supported air gap there. There's no native functionality to do an air gap. So this is where this adds a lot of value in, is that it provides that automated air gap without disrupting your kind of production Veeam environment. In fact, the production Veeam environment doesn't have a clue what's going on there, which is a good thing, because then it makes it more difficult for a threat actor who comes in and gets your backup admin credentials to see, as far as they're concerned, you've only got that primary and secondary copy, or primary copy. It might not know that you've got a vaulted copy somewhere else. And that's where then having the Veeam server inside the actual Vault itself then becomes quite useful, because then that can run its own Sure Backup processes and use that to then do its own kind of scanning of those backups. And then you can use that as a way of detecting any compromised files and backups.
Cool.
I don't think there are
no more questions.
No more questions.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. If you do have other questions or you want to talk about the subject further, reach out, like I say, through your account team, myself and Imran. We're on LinkedIn. Our email addresses are first name .surname, or you can reach out through the website or hello, this is CAE. Thanks so much, and everyone enjoy your Tuesdays. Thank you.
Thank you.